Brandon Sanderson has announced a new trilogy, and it's called the Ghostbloods Trilogy, and it takes place in the universe of Mistborn. We're going to talk about it today. Welcome to the Legend Fiction Show. I'm Father Roderick, and my co-host is...
Hi, I'm Dominic, founder of Legend Fiction, and I am stoked to be with you, Father.
And we are so excited to talk about Brandon Sanderson news because there is no fantasy today without Brandon Sanderson. He is the colossus of the fantasy world. Now, of course, that comes with its downsides, but there is a good reason for Brandon Sanderson to be so universally known and loved because his books are awesome. And today we want to talk about the huge news that broke very recently at WorldCon 2025. And that was the announcement of yet more Sanderson books. I don't know how this man does it because he seems to have all these huge books that he keeps writing, and then he has like a whole bunch of secret projects, and then now he is continuing, I think, the saga that started his fame in the fantasy world, and it's the world of Mistborn. That was my first entry into the world of Sanderson. What about you, Dominic?
I think it was Mistborn and one of his Way of Kings books. I think the first one. I was introduced to that like 7 years ago, burned through them, and realized this is a whole new way of writing fantasy that I've never experienced before, and it's absolutely incredible.
I started reading Mistborn, and I was just immediately enchanted by the way he builds this magical system. And I think Mistborn was my first introduction to the whole concept of a magic system with the Allomancy, ingesting metals and then being able to do all sorts of very, very cool things like jumping super high, and I loved it. And then gradually I started to discover that actually Mistborn is part of a much bigger universe called the Cosmere. But the Cosmere is a much bigger world than just the Mistborn planet, because these are actually planets of a whole solar system, isn't it?
It's something like that, and each one is at a different stage of development. So it's a little bit like Star Trek, how it travels across all kinds of different cultures and times. So he's done that too, and as unique as every world is, and as unique as each of the different magic systems are, somewhere in the back of his gigantic brain, he's connected it all together into a massive, coherent Cosmere, which is absolutely incredible.
And that, for me, is what attracts me to these books.
People who I think love these books know that they're in for a massive adventure that's going to continue across multiple books. Committing to him is like entering into Narnia, and then it just doesn't end, and it continues to go. Well, as you just mentioned, the whole Ghostbloods, I'd not even known about this until you said, hey, we need to make a recording about this. And it's like, what is Ghostbloods? And then you say, It's an entire trilogy landing in, a couple of years or next year all at once or something insane like that?
We don't know yet exactly when this is going to appear, and we will go into the details of the whole planning of this trilogy and how Brandon Sanderson is building his books in one of our future segments. But suffice it to know that this is a project that he has been working on for quite a while. In fact, if you go to the website of Brandon Sanderson, so that's brandonsanderson.com, you will see these circles. And he's got about 4 of them, and each circle shows you the progress on one of his many writing
I can't
projects.
get over how ludicrously specific he is about those.
But it's
love
awesome
that. For us. Yeah.
I immediately was like, how can I put that on my own website? Because I'm writing several different books at the same time. You notice that whole new trilogy is already, or I think the first book is already at the 50% mark. So he feels confident that this is something that he can now present. And I love that because there's nothing worse than someone who announces a book, let's say the ending of a big saga, and then takes like 20 years to finish it. I have no idea who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sanderson, I think he's a different character. He's very disciplined, very dependable. That's also why so many people love him, because you always know that he's going to deliver. Maybe not always in the way that people expect him to deliver, but nevertheless, you can count on him on meeting his deadlines. And especially now that he has this huge production team surrounding him, where it's almost like, well, it's similar to a composer like John Williams. John Williams has written so many amazing soundtracks, but he's not going to sit down and write every single, string and here's a harp. And he'll just write the main themes, and then he'll hand it over to an entire team that will continue to work on the orchestration. And I imagine that Sanderson does similar things. He writes this first draft, and then he hands it over to his production team. They will go over all the minutiae and seeing if everything is coherent and look at the inconsistencies. So that, of course, allows him to produce so much. But what I love about this announcement of the Ghostbloods trilogy is that it is the third trilogy in the Mistborn universe. This is taking place on one planet. But what I love about this is that he makes a time jump. So the original Mistborn trilogy feels very much like classic epic fantasy
heist. Yep.
And then what he did later on, and this is when he was working on finishing The Wheel of Time, he needed a break in between those books. And so almost to kind of amuse himself, like a little side hobby, he created another series of books in the Mistborn universe, but he forwarded in time several centuries. And now all of a sudden, this is the Wax and Wayne. It's more of a Western vibe. Yeah. And it is steampunky. So it's like 19th century technology. You get the first skyscrapers that are being built, some airships. And those books are a lot shorter, and they're more entertaining, fast-paced, action-based. And I like that because I love to be in this world, but I don't necessarily am waiting for another epic thing with like 600, 700-page books. And it's interesting to see what he's doing now with the announced trilogy. First of all, it's a trilogy. So it's 3 books. Ghostbloods is moving forward in time even more. And this takes place in a world, from what I've heard, that is more akin to... So it is kind of near future, but the vibe of the world is like the 80s of the last century. The time of, Back to the Future. Jaws, E.T., that's the kind of culture that is having a revival now, because all the people that are old guys like me, or old women, they want to re-immerse themselves in that world. But to wrap things up, I want to ask our listeners how they feel about this new trilogy. If they've read the previous, 7 books now? Are you excited? Are you wary? Just to let you know, you can hear more about these topics by following our show. Just search for Legend Fiction or Legend Fiction Show, and there's a website as well where you can even join Legend Fiction. That's legendfiction.com.